Welcome to Dreamy Old Stories. Here we tell slow and gentle tales from history. Stories that calm your mind and help you fall asleep. If you enjoy the journey, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin tonight's dreamy story. As you settle in for rest, imagine the world growing quieter. Not suddenly, but gently. The sun has already slipped behind distant rooftops, and the last light lingers only as a memory on stone walls. This is not a moment of endings. It is a moment of slowing. A moment when the medieval town begins to change its rhythm, preparing itself for the long hours of night. In medieval life, night was not an interruption. It was an expected phase, as familiar as morning. People did not think of night as empty. Time, they thought of it as a different kind of living, one that required patience, routine, and small rituals repeated so often that they became almost invisible. As daylight faded, work naturally softened. Fields no longer demanded attention. Workshops closed their shutters, not with haste, but with habit. Tools were cleaned and set aside in the same places they had rested the night before. Nothing needed to be rushed, because tomorrow would look very much like today. Inside homes, the change from day to night was marked quietly. Candles were brought out, not to flood rooms with light, but to soften the darkness. A single flame was usually enough. Too much light wasted precious wax, and too little made the room unfamiliar. Balance mattered more than brightness. The lighting of a candle was often a small ritual in itself. It was done carefully, sometimes with a brief pause, as if acknowledging that the day had officially ended. The flame did not announce anything. It simply existed, steady and calm, giving shape to shadows already known. Evening meals followed patterns that rarely changed. Food was simple, warm and filling rather than exciting. Bread, porridge, stews that had simmered slowly throughout. The afternoon, eating at night, was not a celebration. It was preparation for rest. People ate to be comfortable, not to be impressed. After the meal, movement slowed further. Children were guided toward sleep early, especially during colder months. Adults remained awake a little longer, but rarely without purpose. Nighttime was not for wandering thoughts. It was for closing the day properly. In many households, short prayers or familiar phrases were spoken aloud. Not loudly, and not always formally. Sometimes they were barely more than murmured words. They were less about asking for protection and more about maintaining order. Speaking the same words each night made the darkness predictable. Silence held an important place in medieval nights. It was not feared, it was expected. Without modern noise, silence became a presence of its own, filling rooms and streets evenly. People learned to listen to it, the way one listens to steady rain. Outside, towns did not fully disappear after sunset. They changed shape. Streets narrowed as shadows gathered along walls. Footsteps became more noticeable because there were fewer of them. A single sound could travel farther at night, not because it was louder, but because there was less to compete with it. Night watchmen, where they existed, moved slowly through familiar paths. They were not symbols of constant danger. They were reminders of continuity. Their presence meant that night followed rules, just like day did. Nothing needed to happen for them to matter. Doors were secured with simple routines. Bars were placed, latches checked. These actions were done the same way every evening, often without conscious thought. The body remembered the order even when the mind was already tired. Before sleep, people prepared themselves carefully. Clothing was folded or placed nearby for morning. Shoes were set close to the bed. Water was kept within reach. These small preparations reduced uncertainty. Knowing that things were ready made it easier to let go. Beds themselves were shared spaces, not places of isolation. Family members often slept close together, both for warmth and reassurance. Sleep was understood as a vulnerable state, and closeness reduced that vulnerability. No one expected perfect rest. They expected rest that was good enough. As the night settled fully, thoughts slowed along with the body. There was no pressure to fall asleep quickly. Sleep arrived when it was ready. The darkness did not demand attention. It waited. In these hours, medieval night rituals did not feel special to those living them. They felt normal. They were woven into daily life so tightly that they went unnoticed. Yet it is in these quiet repetitions that the shape of medieval nights truly appears. And as the town rested, breathing slowly beneath the stars, the night continued its work, not by changing things, but by holding them steady. As the night deepened, the medieval town entered a state that felt neither awake nor fully asleep. It rested in between. This middle state was familiar and comfortable, shaped by long habit rather than conscious choice. People understood that the night would last many hours, and there was no need to hurry through it. Inside homes, the fire was often allowed to settle into low embers. It was not extinguished completely. Keeping a small glow alive made morning. Easing kept the room from feeling abandoned. The faint warmth also reminded sleepers that the household still existed as a unit. Even in silence, sounds at night carried meaning. The soft crackle of wood, the shifting of straw bedding, the occasional cough or sigh. These were not interruptions. They were confirmations that life continued quietly. Complete silence was rare indoors, and that was reassuring. In towns, certain. Rhythms marked the passing of night hours. Church bells sometimes rang at fixed times, even after dark. They were not alarms. They were signals of order. Hearing a bell meant that time was still moving forward in a known pattern. For those who remained awake longer, night offered a different kind of focus. Tasks done by candlelight demanded patience. Sewing, mending, or quiet reading moved slowly. The limited light discouraged rushing. It guided hands to work carefully, one motion at a time. Reading at night, when it happened, was a soft activity. Books were precious, and eyes tired quickly in dim light. Texts were often read aloud, quietly, to share the effort. Words spoken softly had a calming effect, especially when they were familiar passages heard many times before. Sleep itself was not always continuous. Many medieval people experienced what we would call broken sleep. They slept for several hours, woke naturally, then returned to rest later. This waking period was not seen as a problem. It was simply part of the night's shape. During these quiet waking moments, people might pray, think, or sit silently. Some checked the fire. Others listened to the night outside. There was no expectation of productivity. Being awake was not a failure. It was just another state. Outside, the town remained calm but not lifeless. Animals shifted in their enclosures. A horse might stamp its hoof. A dog might move closer to a doorway. These sounds blended into the background, as steady as breathing. Weather played a strong role in how nights felt. Rain softened everything. Snow reflected faint light and made the darkness gentler. Wind, when it came, was listened to carefully, not feared, but noted. People learned to read the night by sound. A familiar creak of wood meant a building settling. An unfamiliar noise drew quiet attention, not panic. Most sounds had explanations rooted in daily life. Candles were not kept burning all night in most homes. Once sleep settled in, light was allowed to fade. Darkness was accepted fully. Eyes adjusted. Dreams took over. Clothing worn to bed was simple. Nothing tight or complicated. Comfort mattered more than appearance. The body needed freedom to rest deeply in shared sleeping spaces. Small movements were common. Someone turning, someone reaching for warmth. These movements were understood and ignored. They did not break rest. They were part of it. Night also carried social meaning. Certain behaviors were reserved only for daylight. At night, restraint ruled. Voices stayed low. Movements stayed minimal. Respect for others' rest was woven into custom, not enforced by rule. Fear of night did exist, but it was not constant. Stories of danger were balanced by long experience. Most nights passed without incident. This quiet consistency mattered more than rare disruptions. As hours passed, the medieval night did not feel endless. It felt measured. Each ritual, each repeated habit, gently marked progress toward morning. No one rushed toward dawn. They trusted it would arrive, and slowly, almost without being noticed, the night continued to hold the town in place, keeping everything steady until the first signs of change appeared far away. As the final hours of night approached, the town rested in its most settled state. Nothing new was expected to happen. That expectation itself brought calm. When nothing is demanded, the mind loosens its grip. Sleep during these hours often felt deeper. The body, having already passed through lighter rest, now sank more fully. Breathing slowed. Thoughts lost their edges. Dreams, when they came, were shaped by familiar sounds and spaces. For those who woke briefly, the night felt stable rather than uncertain. The darkness was no longer something to observe. It simply existed, evenly spread across room and street. Eyes opened, noticed very little, and closed again. Fires that had burned all day were now quiet. Only a faint warmth remained, enough to prevent cold from becoming sharp. The room smelled of ash and wood, a scent tied closely to safety. Even in sleep, people recognized it. Outside, the sky moved slowly. Stars shifted positions without drawing attention to themselves. Clouds passed when they passed. Nothing in the sky demanded interpretation. It was enough to know it was there. Night rituals were rarely taught directly. They were absorbed through repetition. Children learned them by watching adults move through evening without urgency. By the time they were grown, the actions felt natural, almost automatic. This quiet knowledge mattered. Knowing what came next removed the need for worry. Night followed rules just as day did, only softer ones. The idea of privacy was different at night. Sounds traveled, spaces were shared. Yet this closeness created a sense of collective rest. Everyone slept, or tried to, together. Illness, when it appeared, felt heavier at night. For this reason, small checks were common. A hand placed gently on a forehead. A quiet adjustment of blankets. Care did not need words. Time during the deepest part of night felt less precise. Without strong light, hours blended. People did not measure sleep in exact lengths. They trusted their bodies to know when enough rest had been taken. As the night moved toward its end, subtle changes began. The air shifted. Birds stirred before they sang. The town did not wake yet, but it prepared to. These early signs were not greeted with excitement. They were simply noted. Morning would come, as it always did. There was no need to hurry it forward. Medieval night rituals did not aim to create perfect rest. They aimed to create familiar rest. That familiarity was their strength. Even difficult nights passed more easily when shaped by known patterns. The darkness itself was not treated as an enemy. It was treated as a condition, something to live within, not overcome. As dawn approached, the night loosened its hold gradually. No clear line marked its end. It faded the way it had begun, without announcement. What remained, even as light returned, was the sense that the night had done its job. It had kept the town still. It had allowed bodies to rest and minds to quiet. It had held everything in place. Attention will turn more closely to the people who stayed awake while others slept, and to the quiet roles they played in shaping how medieval nights were experienced, even when most of the town never noticed them. The night returns again, not as something new, but as something already known. What came before has settled into memory, like a familiar room entered in low light. The town rests once more, and within that rest, a small number of people remain, quietly awake. Not everyone in a medieval town slept at the same time. This was not unusual. It was expected. Certain roles existed precisely because night continued even when most people rested. These roles were not dramatic. They were practical, steady, and often unnoticed. Among them were the night watchmen. They were not guards in the modern sense. They did not patrol with urgency or suspicion. Their presence was meant to reassure, not confront. They walked routes. That rarely changed, following streets they knew by heart. Their movement through the town was slow and deliberate. There was no reason to hurry. Speed suggested trouble, and trouble was rare. A calm pace signaled that all was well. The watchman's tools were simple: a staff, a lantern, sometimes a bell or horn. These objects were not symbols of power. They were extensions of routine. They helped the watchman see, be seen, and mark time. Calling the hours was one of the most familiar night rituals. At set moments, the watchman announced the time aloud. Not loudly, just enough to be heard by those awake and half heard by those sleeping. The sound drifted through streets and into homes, settling without disturbance. Hearing the hour reassured sleepers that the night was progressing normally. Time had not stopped. Nothing unexpected had occurred. The world was still turning quietly toward morning. The watchman also listened. Listening mattered more than watching. Unfamiliar sounds were noted. Familiar ones were ignored. Most of what was heard required no response at all. Animals moved at night, and their movements were well known. A cart settling, wood contracting in cooler air, water shifting in pipes or channels. The watchman learned these sounds through repetition. the way one learns a language. In many towns, the watchman was also a neighbor. He knew who lived where. He recognized which doors belonged to which families. This knowledge reduced fear. A place is less threatening when it is familiar. Other night workers existed as well. Bakers often began their work before dawn. Their ovens needed time. Dew needed patience. The smell of baking bread was sometimes the first sign that night was ending. Millers, too, might work late or rise early, depending on water and weather. Their schedules followed natural forces rather than clocks. Night was simply part of that. Rhythm in monasteries and convents, night held a different structure. Prayer divided the hours. Sleep was interrupted by intention rather than accident. The ringing of bells guided movement through darkness, creating a pattern within silence. These religious rituals were calm and measured. They did not aim to disturb the world outside their walls. They existed alongside the town's sleep, not against it. For those awake at night, light was used carefully. Lanterns were shielded from wind. Candles were protected from drafts. Light was directed downward, not outward. It was meant to serve, not announce. Walking at night required attention to texture. Stone felt different underfoot when damp. Uneven ground revealed itself more clearly in darkness. The body adjusted naturally, step by step. Even those awake respected the stillness around them. Voices stayed low. Movement remained purposeful. The goal was not to fill the night, but to pass through it gently. These waking figures did not see themselves as separate from the town's rest. They were part of it. Their quiet activity supported the larger stillness, like a slow heartbeat beneath sleep. Night rituals, then, were not only about preparing for rest. They were also about maintaining balance while rest occurred. Someone was always awake, but no one needed to notice. And as the night continued its slow movement forward, these quiet roles shaped the experience of darkness itself, making it feel held rather than empty. As the watchman continued his slow path, the town remained unchanged. That sameness was the point. Night was not meant to surprise. It was meant to repeat itself gently, hour after hour. Most nights passed without incident, and that regularity shaped how people felt about darkness. When danger is rare, attention softens. The body learns that it can rest without constant alertness. This learning happened over years, quietly, without instruction. Night workers developed an intimate awareness of their surroundings. They noticed how sound behaved differently. After sunset, footsteps echoed longer. Voices traveled farther. Even small movements seemed clearer against the stillness. Smell also became more noticeable. Damp stone, cooling earth, with smoke thinning in the air. These scents marked location and time. They told stories about weather, season, and daily habits. Light at night was never wasted. Lanterns were trimmed. Carefully, wicks were adjusted to avoid smoke. Every flame was watched, because every flame mattered. Light was a resource, not a convenience. For those walking at night, shadows were not empty. They revealed shape and distance. A wall announced itself through cooler air. An open space felt wider even before it could be seen. The body learned to read these cues without thought. Night routines also shaped social trust. Knowing that someone would pass by regularly made sleep easier. Even if the watchman was never seen, his expected presence mattered. Expectation itself became a form of comfort. In towns without formal watch systems, neighbors filled the role. Naturally, someone awake for work would listen. Someone restless would look out a window. Responsibility shifted quietly from one household to another. Women often played a role in night awareness, especially within homes. They noticed changes in sound or temperature. They tended fires and checked doors. Their vigilance was calm, woven into domestic routine. Illness and childbirth frequently occurred at night. For this reason, certain people were known to be reachable after dark. Midwives, healers, family members who lived nearby. Night did not erase community connections. Paths through towns were learned deeply. Walking them in darkness made them part of memory rather than sight. Turns were felt. Distances were known by steps rather than markers. This familiarity reduced fear. Weather changed the character of night work. Rain softened edges and muffled sound. Fog required slower movement. Cold sharpened awareness. Each condition demanded adjustment, not resistance. Even animals adapted to night routines. Stable animals settled when human activity faded. Guard dogs learned which sounds mattered and which did not. Their quiet presence added another layer of reassurance. Time during the night was not experienced as waiting. It was experienced as movement, from one familiar task to the next, from one known sound to another. This prevented boredom from becoming restlessness. Those awake rarely thought of themselves as protecting the town. They thought of themselves as doing what needed to be done. The absence of drama kept the night gentle by maintaining small, steady actions. Night workers allowed sleepers to remain unaware. That unawareness was a success, not a failure. When nothing interrupts rest, the night has done its work well. As hours passed, the subtle signs of change began to appear again. The air cooled differently. Sounds shifted. The night prepared to release its hold, even as it continued to feel complete. These quiet middle hours, held together by routine and familiarity, formed the backbone of medieval nightlife. Even though most people would never remember them clearly in the morning. As the night moved closer to its end, those who remained awake felt the change first. It was not dramatic. It arrived as a subtle shift in texture, like a breath taken more deeply than before. The town itself did not stir yet. Doors stayed closed. Windows remained dark. Sleep still held most people gently, but the night had begun to thin. For night workers, these hours required quiet attention. Fatigue was present, but it was familiar. The body adjusted by slowing rather than forcing itself forward. Movements became even more deliberate, conserving energy. The watchman's route felt shorter now, not because distance had changed, but because repetition had worn smooth edges into memory. Each corner came as expected. Each doorway appeared where it always had. There was comfort in this predictability. Calling the hours near morning carried a slightly different feeling. The voice sounded softer. The words seemed to settle more quickly. After being spoken, sleepers heard them less clearly, and that was acceptable. The night no longer needed to be marked as carefully. In homes, fires were checked one last time. If embers remained, they were left undisturbed. If not, the cold was accepted briefly. Morning warmth would return soon enough. Those who had experienced Broken sleep often drifted back into deeper rest during these hours. The mind, having already wandered, now surrendered more fully. Dreams became quieter. Thoughts lost coherence. Animals sensed the change before people did. Birds shifted in silence before any sound escaped them. Livestock adjusted their weight, preparing to rise. These movements were subtle, easily missed. The air itself felt different, not warmer yet, but less heavy, as if the night had released some of its hold without fully stepping away. Breathing felt easier, though no one would have named the reason. Night rituals did not require a formal ending. They dissolved naturally. Lanterns were extinguished. Tools were set aside. Those awake prepared to rejoin the rhythm of day dawned. The watchman's final circuit did not announce completion. It simply ended where it always did. There was no sense of achievement, only continuity. As light began to gather beyond the town, the purpose of night work became complete. Nothing had happened, and that absence mattered. Medieval nights were successful when they left no memory. When sleepers woke without knowing how carefully the hours had been held for them. Safety was not declared. It was assumed soon, morning. Routines would take over. Shutters would open. Fires would be coaxed back to life. Voices would rise again. But the quiet labor of the night would remain unseen. Its rituals would fade until they were needed once more. They would return the next evening, unchanged. In the next part, attention will move closer to the spaces where most people slept and to how homes themselves were shaped by night, designed not only for living, but for resting together through long hours of darkness. Night returned again, as it always did, and with it came the quiet pull toward the home. While streets and paths shaped the experience of darkness outside, it was inside houses that night settled most deeply. Homes were not designed only for daylight activity. They were shaped carefully to hold people through long, dark hours. A medieval home at night felt smaller than it did during the day. Darkness drew the walls inward. Low ceilings and narrow rooms became comforting rather than restrictive. The space wrapped around its occupants, reducing exposure and movement. Most homes relied on a single main room. This room carried many purposes, but at night, those purposes narrowed. Work tools rested. Conversation faded. The room became a place for stillness. Sleeping arrangements reflected this shared use of space. Beds were placed close together or arranged around the warmth of the hearth. Privacy mattered less than comfort and safety. Being near others made the night feel shorter. Bedding was simple but intentional. Straw mattresses were packed tightly to provide support. Wool blankets trapped warmth efficiently. Sheets were valued but not always present. Nothing was decorative without reason. Preparing the bed was part of the nightly ritual. Blankets were shaken gently. Straw was adjusted if needed. These small actions signaled that the day's demands were finished. Clothing worn during sleep often doubled as daytime wear. People did not change into something entirely different. They loosened. They removed heavy layers. The goal was ease, not separation from the day. At night, the hearth became a quiet center. Even when the fire was low, its presence mattered. The hearth defined where people gathered, even in rest. Its warmth reached unevenly, but predictably. The sounds of the house at night were familiar. Wood cooled and shifted. That movement was expected. It did not signal danger. It signaled that the structure was alive in its own way. Homes were rarely silent inside. Someone breathing, someone turning, someone murmuring in sleep. These sounds blended into a steady background, reassuring rather than distracting. Doors and windows were designed with night in mind. They were small. They closed tightly. This kept warmth in and uncertainty out. Shutters blocked not only cold, but imagination. Light inside the home faded gradually. Candles were snuffed carefully rather than blown out abruptly. Darkness scented slowly, allowing eyes to adjust. This gentleness mattered. Before full sleep arrived, people often lay quietly. They did not seek distraction. They allowed thoughts to slow naturally. There was no expectation of immediate rest. Night inside a medieval home was not empty time. It was held time. Time shaped by routine, closeness, and familiarity. The home absorbed the night and softened it. As the household settled fully, the outside world grew distant. Streets, watchmen, and distant sounds became less relevant. The home took over the work of holding its people through darkness and within. These walls, night rituals, continued quietly, shaping how sleep arrived and how it stayed. Long before morning returned, a sleep settled deeper inside the home. The shared nature of medieval living became more noticeable. Rooms were rarely private spaces. They were collective environments shaped by trust and routine. Night made this closeness feel natural rather than crowded. Children often slept closest to adults. This was not planned formally. It emerged from habit and care. Their presence was both responsibility and comfort, felt even in sleep. Elders, when present, were given places that balanced warmth and ease of movement. Night respected the needs of the body more openly than day. Practical decisions shaped where people rested. Sleep positions changed with season. In winter, bodies turned inward. In warmer months, space widened slightly. These adjustments required no discussion. They were understood. The rhythm of breathing within a room created a shared tempo. One slow breath encouraged another. This quiet synchronization helped rest deepen. No one thought about it. It simply happened. Nighttime thoughts were shaped by surroundings. Familiar walls reduced wandering imagination. Known sounds limited fear. The mind, recognizing safety, loosened its grip. Illness altered night routines, but did not replace them. Care increased quietly. Water was kept close. Blankets were adjusted more often. Night became a space for attention rather than interruption. In homes with animals sheltered nearby, their presence was felt even indoors. A shift of weight in a stall, a soft sound through a wall. These signs of life added to the sense of continuity. Firelight, when present, played softly on walls before fading. Shadows moved slowly, then disappeared. This transition into full darkness was gradual, never sudden. Many people slept lightly at first. This was not seen as a problem. The body took time to trust the night fully. Deep rest came later. Dreams often reflected daily routines. Fields, tools, paths walked repeatedly. The mind rested by revisiting what it already knew. Waking during the night was normal. A person might turn, listen briefly, then sleep again. There was no pressure to remain unconscious. Rest did not require perfection. Sound from outside occasionally entered the home. a distant call, footsteps passing, wind against shutters. These sounds were noted and released. Homes were built to respond to weather. Walls held warmth. Roofs shed rain. Night emphasized these protective qualities, making shelter more meaningful. The shared night also reinforced social bonds. Sleeping near others built trust that extended into daylight. Rest was not a solitary achievement. It was a communal state. As the night continued, the home remained steady. Nothing asked for attention. Nothing demanded change. The routines held dot, and in this held space, sleep deepened naturally, shaped by closeness, familiarity, and the quiet confidence that morning would arrive in its own time. As the night reached its most settled hours, the home felt almost suspended. Nothing new entered the space. Nothing needed to leave. The household rested in a balance that required no effort to maintain. Breathing slowed further. Movement became rare. Even those who shifted in their sleep did so gently, as if aware of others nearby. The shared room seemed to absorb sound, keeping everything soft. In these hours, the boundary between waking and sleeping blurred. Thoughts drifted without direction. Dreams appeared and faded without being remembered. The mind rested by letting go rather than holding on. The physical structure of the home played a quiet role. Thick walls kept out the sharpness of night air. Low roofs trapped warmth close to bodies. These features were not designed for comfort alone. They were designed for endurance. Night inside the home was rarely feared. Stories of danger belonged mostly to the outside world. Indoors, familiarity ruled. Every beam and surface had been seen in daylight many times before. For families who had experienced loss or hardship, night could still carry weight. Yet even then, routine softened that weight. The same preparations, the same sleeping places. These repetitions offered stability when little else could. Time felt different now. Without light, without activity, hours lost their edges. People did not sense how long they slept. They sensed only that rest continued. As the night slowly loosened, small signs appeared within the home. Someone stirred more often. Breathing shifted. The body began to prepare for return. The hearth, quiet through the darkest hours, held the promise of warmth. Even cold embers carried meaning. They connected night to morning when the earliest light touched shutters or door frames. It did not wake the house immediately. It lingered. It waited. The home accepted it gradually, just as it had accepted darkness. Medieval homes were not designed to conquer the night. They were designed to live alongside it, to make darkness manageable through closeness, routine, and day. Trust, as sleep began to lift, the night's work inside the home was complete. People would rise rested enough, not perfectly refreshed, but steady. In the next part, attention will move outward again, toward how streets, sounds, and shared spaces responded as night gave way to morning, and how towns transitioned together from rest back into motion. Night did not end suddenly in a medieval town. Before daylight fully returned, there was a long period of quiet transition. This time belonged neither to night nor to day. It belonged to habit. As the sky slowly lightened, streets remained mostly empty. Doors stayed closed. Shutters held their position. The town was awake only in fragments, and those fragments moved carefully. For many people, waking did not mean rising immediately. Eyes opened, the body listened, breathing adjusted to a new rhythm. Morning was approached gently, without urgency. Inside homes, the first movements were small. Someone reached for a blanket and pulled it closer. Someone shifted position and rested again. Sleep loosened its hold slowly, not all at once. The hearth was often the first focus of the morning. Before words were spoken, embers were checked. If warmth remained, it was protected. If not, fire was rebuilt patiently, layer by layer. Fire starten. Itself followed a ritual learned over years. Hands moved with confidence even while the mind was still quiet. Sparks were encouraged, not forced. Morning fire was never rushed. Light entered homes gradually. It slipped through cracks, through thin shutters, through doorways that had not yet opened. This light was not bright. It was pale and calm, enough to signal change without demanding response. Sounds returned in a measured way. Wood scraped softly. Footsteps appeared one at a time. Voices, when they came, were low and brief. Morning conversation was minimal. People did not feel the need to fill silence. There would be time for that later. For now, quiet remained useful. Children were guided awake gently. There was no sharp dividing line between sleep and responsibility. They learned to move from one to the other without resistance. Clothing was adjusted rather than replaced. Layers were added back. Belts were tightened. The body prepared itself to return to activity without sudden change. Outside, early risers began to shape the town's return. A door opened and closed again. A bucket was lifted. Water moved through familiar channels. Animals responded to these sounds before people did. Horses shifted. Chickens stirred. Livestock sensed that night had released its hold. Smell became more noticeable as morning progressed. Damp stone warming. Ash turning to smoke again. Bread beginning to bake in distant ovens. The night watchman's role faded quietly. There was no ceremony marking the end of duty. Responsibility passed naturally back to daylight routines. For those who had slept poorly, morning arrived without judgment. Fatigue was accepted as part of life. There was no expectation of perfect rest, only enough rest. The transition from night to day was not designed to energize. It was designed to stabilize. By moving slowly, the body adjusted more easily. The mind followed. Medieval mornings carried memory of the night just past. That memory influenced pace and mood. If the night had been calm, the morning felt steady. If it had been restless, the day began more carefully. Rituals did not disappear with daylight. They shifted form. The same attention to repetition, to order, to predictability continued. Morning was not seen as a fresh beginning disconnected from night. It was a continuation. Night and day were parts of the same rhythm, not opposites. As the town moved fully toward activity, the traces of night remained. In slower steps, in softer voices, in habits shaped by hours of darkness. And as daylight took over, it carried with it the quiet influence of night rituals, shaping how the town re-entered motion without breaking the calm that had held it through. Sleep, as morning continued to unfold, the town did not shift all at once into full activity. Instead, it moved in layers. Some people rose early, others waited. The rhythm of return was uneven, and that unevenness was expected. Those who woke first often did so out of necessity rather than choice. Work tied to animals, fire, or food could not wait long. These early movements were quiet and efficient. They respected the lingering presence of night. Inside homes, the separation between night and day remained soft. Beds were not cleared immediately. Sleeping spaces stayed visible, reminding everyone that rest had only just ended. This slowed the pace of the morning. Morning light changed the feeling of familiar objects. Tools looked different when seen after. Rest. Surfaces reflected light in gentler ways. Nothing felt new, but everything felt renewed. The body responded gradually. Muscles stretched without instruction. Posture shifted naturally from rest to readiness. There was no sharp command to begin the day. Morning meals were simple and quiet. Leftover bread, warm liquids, nothing elaborate. Eating early was about readiness, not enjoyment. Conversation remained limited. Words were exchanged only when needed. Silence was not awkward. It was functional. For many, memory of the night influenced how the morning unfolded. A peaceful night allowed steadier movement. A disturbed night encouraged caution. These adjustments were subtle, rarely spoken aloud. Children learned morning behavior by observation. They copied the calm pace of adults. They learned that mornings were not for sudden noise. Night taught restraint that carried into day. Outside, streets filled slowly. Footsteps overlapped. Paths became shared again. The town did not announce its awakening. It revealed it. Shops opened when ready, not at fixed hours. Shutters lifted one at a time. Work resumed without ceremony. There was no sense of being late. The watchman, now indistinguishable from other townspeople, blended back into ordinary life. His presence during the night required no acknowledgement in daylight. This anonymity was part of the role. Morning sounds built gradually. Metal touched stone. Water splashed. Voices rose slightly but remained controlled. The memory of darkness influenced how people treated sound. Even as activity increased, volume stayed moderate. Night had taught caution, and that lesson lingered for those who had worked through the night. Morning brought rest rather than activity. Sleep followed work, reversing the usual order. This was accepted without judgment. The town adjusted quietly around them. Weather shaped the morning mood. Clear skies eased transition. Cold air slowed movement. Rain extended the night's quiet into the day. Homes were reset slowly. Bedding was arranged. Sleeping spaces returned to daily use. This transformation was unhurried. Rituals of closure followed rituals of rest. Night was not dismissed abruptly. It was folded away gently, like a familiar garment. Morning routines carried the imprint of night. Habits, patience, predictability, awareness of others. These qualities did not vanish with sunlight. They shaped how work began, how people interacted, how the day unfolded. The medieval town did not wake by breaking free from night. It emerged from it carefully, carrying forward the calm that darkness had provided. And as daylight strengthened, the influence of night rituals remained present, guiding movement and behavior long after the stars had faded from view. As the morning settled fully into place, the final traces of night loosened without resistance. There was no moment when one could say the night had truly ended. It simply stepped back, leaving behind its influence in small, lasting ways. People moved with a steadiness shaped by rest. Whether that rest had been deep or light, the body accepted what it had received and continued forward. There was little reflection on the quality of sleep. Sleep was not evaluated. It was lived. Tasks expanded gradually. What began as simple preparation became fuller work. Hands found familiar tools. Feet followed known paths. The town returned to its daytime shape without strain. Even as activity increased, the memory of night encouraged restraint. Movements remained economical. Energy was spent carefully. The day was long, and it required pacing. Homes, now fully awake, still carried the atmosphere of shared rest. Beds had been folded away or repurposed. Sleeping spaces returned to work and gathering. Yet the closeness of night lingered in how people occupied the room. Light now filled spaces more completely. Corners became visible again. Shadows retreated. But the change was gentle, not sudden. For those who had remained awake through the night, this was a time of withdrawal. They stepped out of motion and into rest. Sleep arrived for them as daylight strengthened. This reversal was normal, accepted as part of the town's balance. Morning did not erase the night's labor. It relied on it. Because the night had been held carefully, the morning could unfold without disruption. Rituals served this continuity. They prevented sharp edges between states. They allowed one part of the day to pass its influence to the next. The medieval understanding of time was not segmented cleanly. Night and day were not opposites in conflict. They were partners in a shared cycle. Each prepared the ground for the other. This understanding reduced urgency. If something was not finished today, it could wait. Another night would come. Another morning would follow. As the sun climbed higher, the town lost its quiet softness and gained clarity. Voices became more confident. Movement became more direct. Yet the calm foundation remained. People carried themselves differently because of how they had rested together. Shared night created shared patience. Even conflicts were approached more slowly in the early hours. The rituals surrounding night did not exist only to protect sleep. They shaped the emotional texture of the town. They taught moderation. They encouraged awareness of others. By the time midday approached, night felt distant, but its work had already been done. The day stood on the structure built during darkness. Medieval. Life depended on this balance. Without calm nights, days would fray. Without gentle mornings, rest would feel wasted. As the town moved fully into daylight, the cycle continued unseen. Night waited beyond the horizon, unchanged, ready to return. In the next part, attention will shift toward how sound, silence, and shared expectations shaped behavior after dark, and how communities learned to listen to the night as carefully as they lived within it. Night in a medieval town was not experienced only through sight. Sound played an equally important role, sometimes an even greater one. When light faded, listening became the primary way people understood their surroundings. The night was learned. Through the ear as daylight disappeared, familiar sounds changed character. During the day, noise blended into activity. At night, each sound stood more clearly on its own. This clarity did not create fear by itself. It created awareness. People learned early which sounds belonged to the night. the creak of wood as buildings cooled, the distant movement of water, the slow shifting of animals settling. These sounds were not warnings. They were signs that the world continued quietly. Silence itself was not empty. It was filled with expectation. A sudden sound mattered only because silence had prepared space for it. In this way, silence and sound worked together. Within homes, listening was constant even during rest. Someone turning in sleep was noticed without waking fully. A cough registered briefly, then faded from attention. The body listened without effort. Parents listened for children. Children listened for adults. This quiet exchange of awareness created reassurance. Even in sleep, people felt less alone. Outside, towns carried their own nighttime sound patterns. Footsteps on stone had a particular rhythm. Wind moved differently through narrow streets. Voices, when they appeared, traveled farther and seemed closer than they were. Most nighttime sounds were familiar enough to be ignored. This familiarity was learned over years. A person new to a town often found night more unsettling than those who had lived there long. Knowledge reduced uncertainty. Watchmen relied heavily on listening. Their eyes were limited by darkness. Their ears filled the gap. They paused often, not to look, but to hear. Listening required patience. Rushing masked important detail. Stillness sharpened perception. The night rewarded those who moved slowly. Sound also shaped behavior. People adjusted how they walked, how they closed doors, how they spoke. At night, every action was performed with awareness of how it would sound. Noise was controlled not by rule, but by habit. Homes were built with sound in mind, even if unintentionally. Thick walls softened outside noise. Small windows limited intrusion. Doors fit tightly to reduce both cold and sound. Inside, floors creaked, but their patterns were known. A familiar creak meant nothing. An unfamiliar one invited quiet attention. Most nights, no explanation was needed. Animals contributed their own layer of sound. Dogs shifted inside. Horses breathed steadily. These sounds blended into the background of safety. Sound also marked time. Bells in the distance. Calls from watchmen. The timing of these sounds reassured sleepers that the night followed order. Even those fully asleep were influenced by sound. A calm night encouraged deeper rest. A restless one kept sleep lighter. The body responded without conscious thought. Night rituals included learning when not to listen. Constant alertness was exhausting. People learned to trust familiar patterns and ignore them. This selective listening preserved rest. Stories and beliefs about night often centered on sound. Strange noises were given meaning through explanation rather than fear. Understanding reduced imagination's reach. Over generations, communities developed shared expectations about nighttime sound. What was acceptable? What required attention? What could be safely ignored? These shared expectations shaped how night felt. A town that listened together rested together. Trust in sound patterns became trust in the night itself. As darkness settled fully, listening replaced watching as the primary sense. The night revealed itself, not through what could be seen, but through what could be heard. And through this, quiet attention. Medieval people learned to live comfortably within darkness, rather than resist it. As the night continued, listening became less deliberate and more instinctive. People no longer thought about sound as something to analyze. It became part of the background of rest. Woven into breathing and stillness within the home, sound created a sense of shared presence. Even without seeing one another, people knew where others were. A slow breath nearby, a shift of fabric. These small sounds confirmed closeness and safety. This awareness reduced the need for light. Darkness did not isolate people from each other. Sound maintained connection when sight could not. In this way, night did not separate the household. It drew it inward. Outside, the town carried its own quiet conversation. Water moved through channels beneath streets. Wood contracted as temperatures dropped. Stone held the day's warmth and released it slowly. These sounds belonged to place itself. The repetition of these sounds created familiarity. When the same noises returned night after night, they lost significance. They became part of what sleep rested upon. Absence of these sounds, rather than their presence, drew attention. Night workers relied on this stability. They learned which sounds marked normal passage of time, which indicated weather, which suggested human movement. Listening became a form of reading the town. Voices at night were treated carefully. When speech occurred, it was purposeful. Words were chosen for clarity rather than volume. There was no need to project. The night carried sound efficiently on its own. This careful use of voice reinforced restraint. People learned that loudness disrupted not only others, but themselves. Quiet voices matched the pace of night and reduced tension. Homes responded differently to sound depending on construction. Thick walls softened noise. Thatched roofs absorbed it. Wooden floors carried it. Families learned these qualities through experience. Sound also revealed weather changes. Rain altered how streets sounded. Wind changed the tone of familiar spaces. These shifts were noticed without effort and accepted without alarm. Animals reacted to sound before people did. A dog lifting its head. Livestock shifting. These reactions were noted, then released. Rarely did they require response. Children learned nighttime listening gradually. At first, every sound seemed important. Over time, they learned which ones mattered. This learning reduced fear and encouraged rest. Listening at night was not constant. Vigilance. It was a balance. Too much attention kept the mind active. Too little invited uncertainty. Routine helped maintain this balance in shared sleeping spaces. Sound regulated movement. People adjusted position quietly. They learned how to move without waking others. These habits carried into adulthood. Even dreams were influenced by sound. A distant bell whined against shutters. These elements entered sleep gently, shaping dreams without waking the dreamer. Communities developed an unspoken agreement about night sound. Certain actions were avoided. Certain noises were tolerated. This agreement reduced conflict and supported rest. When unfamiliar sounds did occur, response was measured. Listening came first. Interpretation followed. Reaction was last. This order prevented unnecessary alarm. Over time, the night trained people to trust their senses without being ruled by them. Listening became quiet confidence rather than tension. As hours passed, sound and silence blended into a steady environment. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing required explanation. The night held its shape through familiarity. And within this landscape of quiet listening, medieval people found rest not by escaping sound, but by understanding it, allowing the night to speak softly without interrupting sleep. As the night moved toward its deepest hours, sound softened further, not because it disappeared, but because it became fully expected. Nothing new needed to be identified. Nothing asked to be understood. The night had already explained itself. For most sleepers, listening now happened beneath awareness. The body remained receptive, but the mind let go. Sounds passed through without leaving marks. Rest deepened because nothing felt unresolved. In Holmes, the pattern of sound remained steady. Breathing continued. The occasional movement settled quickly. The structure of the house responded quietly, holding warmth and stillness together. This consistency mattered. When sound behaves predictably, the mind relaxes. The night no longer feels like a space to monitor. It becomes a space to inhabit. Outside, the town rested within its own acoustic boundary. Distant sounds blurred rather than sharpened. What had once been distinct now felt far away. The town folded inward, protected by familiarity. For those still awake, listening shifted purpose. Instead of identifying change, it confirmed stability. The absence of disruption became information in itself. Nothing happening was the desired result. Night workers slowed further. Their movements grew lighter. Footsteps were placed with care, not out of fear, but respect for the surrounding quiet. The night was not to be disturbed without reason. Sound also guided restraint. Doors were handled gently. Tools were set down rather than dropped. Each action acknowledged the shared nature of rest. In this way, night rituals extended beyond intention. They shaped behavior automatically. People did not think about being quiet. They simply were. Listening during these hours rarely led to response. Sounds were registered, then released. The body remained ready without becoming tense. This balance supported rest for everyone. Animals mirrored this calm. Their movements slowed. Their sounds softened. They responded to the same rhythms, guided by the same quiet cues. The deeper the night became, the less sound mattered individually. What mattered was the overall texture. Smooth, unbroken, steady. When a sound did break this texture, it stood out clearly. But even then, reaction was measured. The night had taught patience. Listening came first, not action. Over generations, this relationship with sound shaped community trust. People believed that if something truly needed attention, it would make itself known. Until then, rest was allowed. As the night began its slow movement toward morning, sound changed subtly again. Not louder, different. A hint of movement returning far away. Sleepers sensed this without waking. The body recognized transition before the mind did. Rest adjusted naturally. The night's work through sound was complete. It had guided awareness without demanding it. It had shaped behavior without instruction. It had supported rest through understanding rather than silence. In the next part, attention will turn to shared expectations and unwritten rules that governed nighttime behavior, and how communities learned not only to listen to the night, but to agree on how to live within it together.